you and I have had a relationship that goes all the way back to the mid-'80s when we first met.
A very long time.
And 20 years back we met in London, I remember the first time, and we've just had a marvelous time together ever since in lots of different ways.
And discovered a lot of things that we enjoy in common, which is nice.
And because of that, and your relationship to your World War II experiences and all that, we've had some tremendously interesting trips with you,
yes.
the coast and around Dover and places like that.
Yes, we have.
So I thought it would be very, very interesting for people to have a chance to hear you talk about the really wonderfully eclectic life that you've had in terms of our business, not only in the band side, but the orchestral and every other area of endeavor. And so let's talk just a little bit about the heritage of Geoffrey Brand and how this all begins.
Well, I was fortunate that I was born into a family which was associated with music as a natural part of life. They were members of the Salvation Army, and my father played the tuba in the band, and I have an older brother who was already beginning to play a brass instrument. My mother's relationship with her brothers was very strong. One was the bandmaster of a local Salvation Army band, and there were other brothers, so brass instruments were part of the furniture in the house. I would see a cornet or a trombone just lying about. And when I was very young, of course, I was taken on Sunday every week without fail to the Salvation Army, and I used to hear the most marvelous sounds from the band, you know, and also the choir, Salvation Army choir. So bands and singing were very much part. And the music that I enjoyed, of course, was stimulating. Sort of music, for example, a march by Eric Hall. There's a very famous brass band composer called Torchbearers. Now, that's the sort of music that I heard as a little boy of 3 and 4, and apparently got very excited about it, and I can remember that. So that was my introduction to the world of music through brass and voices. World War II was an enormous influence on everybody's life, of course. 1939 in Europe, and I was then a boy, 13, and playing in the band and enjoying it. But I had never really met professional musicians, because in my home city of Gloucester, people didn't work at music as a profession. It was a hobby. And then the Royal Air Force brought to my home city, very close, one of its bands. All the services had their bands, and in this particular band were 5 members of the Salvation Army who all played, and they suddenly started coming on Sunday to the Salvation Army. One of these people was a very fine trumpet player. He was already in the London Symphony Orchestra, and he was only 12 years older than I was, and we became great friends. And he became the conductor for those warriors of the band in Gloucester. So here I was hearing a live, professional, very fine trumpet player. And very soon I was having lessons, and as I improved, he introduced me to the orchestral repertoire on the trumpet. And then when I was about 15, 16, he started inviting me to go and do engagements with him. He was being asked to play at concerts and needed a second trumpet player, and I'd like you to come and play. So that was marvelous, and quite soon he talked to me in terms of thinking about becoming a professional musician and a professional trumpet player. And I had no idea of the entree to that world, except that I knew I would need to go and study. And he suggested that I should apply for a scholarship at one of the music colleges in London, and I wrote to the Royal Academy of Music and got the forms, and when I was approaching 18 years of age, went to London and entered for a scholarship, which meant that I had to play a recital and viva voce and a written examination and an oral test, all the usual thing. And to my delight, and I must say astonishment, I was awarded the scholarship and was informed by post 2 days later, because I had now arrived at the age of 18, there arrived also through the letterbox the letter which said that I was to be conscripted into the British Army, because now I was 18. So this was in 1944, and so off I went into the British Army, and my ambition was, of course, to remain associated in music, which meant getting into a band, which was very difficult because, of course, all the best professional musicians in the war were playing in bands. But I was very fortunate, and I was accepted into the band of the Royal Army Service Corps, which was one of the staff bands, very good band. So that was where I was able, and mingling with professional musicians in my army service. Then, of course, the great thing was my scholarship was held in abeyance, and I was desperately keen. And the war had ended in 1945, but it took until 1947 to obtain my release in order to go as a student again, which is what I was longing to do. Now I was a student at the Royal Academy of Music. I also knew that what I ultimately was fascinated and wanted to do was conduct. And so when I arrived at the Royal Academy of Music, I actually did a double first study of the trumpet and conducting. I was a member of the conducting class with all that goes with that, you know, which is marvelous. That 3 months of non-stop concerts with a miraculous conductor. By the end of this, I had changed my whole concept of the role of the conductor. I saw a man whose gestures induced sounds, the sounds that he had already conceived. It wasn't a question of beating, it was a question of enticing from those wonderful players, and it was a great orchestra, marvelous sounds. I knew that this was what I wanted to do. Now I should tell you that during my time with the Beecham Orchestra, one of the pieces that he used to absolutely bewitch the audience with was the Overture Corsair by Berlioz, and it was a tremendous. I'd like you to listen to a little of that. Okay, so you've heard some of Corsair. This is going to appear again in my life later, but at the Opera House again, music that for me I had not encountered in its rightful place. I stayed for 5 years in the Opera House and loved every moment. Wonderful. But I knew that I was going to conduct. That became the mission that I knew. And by now, of course, I had 2 young children. And conducting can be very precarious. So I decided that I needed a little bridge to move from being a professional trumpet player, very busy, working with different orchestras under great conductors, people like Furtwängler from Germany, people like Van Beinum, the great conductor of the Concertgebouw Orchestra, and Herbert von Karajan. All these people were coming regularly to London, and I was being invited to play concerts with orchestras that they were conducting. But I knew that was it. I'd done that. And then something again quite unexpected happened. I was invited to apply to be a music producer at the BBC. And at once I knew this would be a very, very good step between being a trumpet player and doing what I wanted to do. And I thought I would stay for 5, 6 years at the most. In fact, I stayed for 12. It was fascinating work. I was working with fine musicians. I was now responsible for building concerts and building radio broadcasts with orchestras, with choirs, chamber music, very wide brief. It was a marvelous experience. But still, I knew the time had to come when I was going to conduct. 12 years later, I left the BBC, which was a very bold thing to do. And again, quite unexpectedly and miraculously, I had been working with concerts which were based on British music, a whole sequence of concerts of British music. And I was asked to do a concert by one of my colleagues, which was a concert of brass band music. And he said, I would like you to come and conduct this for me. And I know you're leaving us. Come and conduct this for me. Which band would you like? Well, one of the very finest brass bands in Great Britain and indeed anywhere in the world. There's a band called Black Dyke Mills. It's a famous band. And I was asking, did the broadcast, and at the end of the broadcast, they had a committee meeting which comprised all the members of the band. And a little later came up and asked if I would be interested in taking them as their professional conductor to the National Brass Band Championships of Great Britain. And I was delighted and said yes, I would. And that was in October of this. I left the BBC in July, and in October I was now the conductor of the Black Dyke Mills Band. I had also become editor of a brass band weekly journal called the British Bandsman, which still is a weekly journal. So here was my life suddenly enveloped by bands, brass bands. And in October, the Black Dyke Mills Band won the National Brass Band Championships of Great Britain, playing a piece by the same Eric Ball, whose music, the March Reader, called Journey into Freedom. And I stayed with Black Dyke, but very quickly I was being invited to conduct other bands, tour abroad and going as a clinician to all parts of the world, and quite soon I was going to the continent of Europe, Denmark, Sweden, quite regularly, and then Australia and New Zealand, and it was becoming very exciting. And I knew the time had come when I could not spend all my time any longer with one band. So whilst I went on doing concerts with Black Dyke, and we did wonderful things, we also were playing a lot at music festivals, and people were writing music for us.
What were the range of years there with Black Dyke?
8 years, from 1967 to 75. By this time, by 75, I had become also associated with a music publishing company, which was at that time a brass band music publishing company. The name was R. Smith & Company Limited, very well known, internationally known. And this meant that I had started developing my own arranging with the company, editing for the company, discussing and inviting composers to write with the company. And of course this, with my conducting, again meant that I was enormously busy and travelling. And I was being invited now to conduct orchestras for the BBC, which was an extension of my commitment. And I started being invited to come to America to conduct as a clinician and to visit universities and work with their band programs. And so it's gone on, this enormous development, you know. And I then knew I was doing what I really wanted to do. And this has continued ever since. It's been absolutely wonderful. So the whole family has an association with music, which is quite wonderful. And my life has achieved in episodes almost as though doors have opened at exactly the right time. I have a guardian angel that's looked after me very nicely, and I can look back and say it's been an absolutely wonderful way to spend my life. I wouldn't want to have missed any part of it, and it goes on. I know. It goes on.
And there are also all kinds of little things that have happened that I know are not directly connected to you, but indirectly they do bear upon you. And what I'm going to talk about here for a moment is the really terrific movie Brassed Off.
Yes.
Which is with the Grimethorpe Colliery Band, the entire soundtrack.
Yes.
And I know you conducted that band.
Yes, I did. Yes, I took them to one of our championships, and again, the band won, which was very fortunate. That's a very good movie. It stretches the details a little in order to achieve a better movie, but why not? Why not?
Absolutely.
And it's a great band. It's a great band.
And the other thing, of course, that's to me is very interesting about that is that band actually did in the movie, a different story, but they did win the championships.
Oh yes.
So it's really vicariously it's Geoffrey Brand.
Well, there you go. I know the feeling, exactly the feeling of elation when if you remember in the movie, that's at the Royal Albert Hall in London. And it's exactly like that, and it still happens every year. In October, it's the National Brass Band Championship in London, and the elation for the winning band is no less than you see in the film. Okay? But there's no colliery anymore. The Grimethorpe Colliery Band, as it was, has dropped the name colliery, but that doesn't apply. But the feeling and the sense, these are all amateur bands. The commitment, they rehearse at least twice a week, and when they are going for big concerts, competitions, they will rehearse every night until they really know the music inside out and can perform it at a wonderful level.
Yeah, it's terrific.
It's a great movement. Great movement.
Well, as forever, my good friend, it's terrific to be with you.
Thank you.
And I hope you have the best of holidays with you, and give our best to your wife.
Thank you. That's lovely. And my same to you also. It's a great joy to know you and to be a friend of Max McKee.
Thank you.